Awesome.
It is live, my friend.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, thank you everyone
And
for joining us. That's a really kind lead. I tried my best. But really what we're going to talk about today is first base. We're in the middle of our positional previews where we detail the first base position at the big league level as well as the organizational depth, which may be relevant in the 2017 season. This is perhaps the easiest conversation we're going to have about any position outside of shortstop. We're going to be able to talk about the Indians adding a top 10 hitter of the last 5 years and retaining Carlos Santana, a top 20 hitter from the past 5 years. So I think in terms of consistency and value, this is the easiest position to discuss. So, give me something that's a little hot takey about first base, Jim. Give me a hot take.
I guess offensively, there's really not a hot take there unless you talk about maybe a guy like Encarnacion regressing, which I don't think either one of us thinks is going to happen. So, I guess the only interesting part of this where there could be some, who's going to play first base and who's going to play DH. I think maybe the hot take would be, and this isn't really my hot take, it's just a hot take I think we'll see, is that Carlos Santana will bitch and moan if he doesn't get enough time at first base. And when I say that out loud, it sounds ridiculous. I will say this, though. It's possible that he could get annoyed if he doesn't play a lot of first base. So I guess throwing it back to you, Mike, is who's going to play more first base, Encarnacion and Carlos Santana? And honestly, I think it's going to be Carlos Santana.
Yeah, I totally do too. He's makes way more sense of the position. He actually graded out pretty well there the last couple of years. He's a little short, which I think people sort of are frustrated about. He's about a little below 6 foot, and traditionally a first baseman who are 6'4" and hulking. But he's pretty athletic. He has solid hands. He does decent stuff at first base, and it's not a high usage position in terms of range, so it's not really a problem. And Santana, this is the final year of his contract. Encarnacion, you're trying to protect his body because you've just signed him to a 3-year, $60 million deal. So throwing him out there at first base and raising injury risk probably isn't something necessary to do when you have Santana who can do it right now. I think it'll be a timeshare, but I'd bet Santana plays 100 games at first base and Encarnacion plays 50 to 60, something in that ballpark, just to stay active, protect Santana a little bit throughout the season, get him rest, but also keep him involved the way he wants to be. So I don't know. Encarnacion does not look particularly athletic compared to Carlos Santana, and that sounds crazy looking at Carlos Santana, but he's sneaky athletic. Like, he steals 5 bases a year, and everybody's surprised. But he's sort of quick like a cat. He's a bear in a cat's body or something, or a cat in a bear's body. I don't know, one of the two.
I don't even know what that means, but I like both references. Can they play Pope?
But Encarnacion is a big dude, and I'm just a little scared that he's going to go eat like 4 pastrami sandwiches at Panini's every night after the game. So it's a concern.
Well, it is a concern, especially considering he's been seen about the town at Cavs games and whatnot. Wandering about with his Cleveland paraphernalia, which should suit him well. I will say this. I'm fairly impressed with Encarnacion's immediate love of Cleveland. Immediately, he's seen wearing a LeBron James jersey somewhere outside of Cleveland. And then, of course, is seen at a local Cleveland Cavaliers game. This is a guy who's embracing Cleveland. It won't be long until we see him gallivanting through the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame here pretty soon, or perhaps at the Science Center, or maybe, I don't know, wandering about the town playing Pokemon Go. This is where I see Edwin Encarnacion is slowly becoming the new, mascot of Cleveland, I think.
We're 3 for 5 in Cleveland references already, so I'm completely content with that. But I will say that, I think Encarnacion, these guys have gotten so good at immediately playing to the town that they move into, and it feels really PR-like. And sometimes it's Joe Hayden is someone who has really played into the I love Cleveland, I love being here even though I'm never actually on the field thing. But I think Encarnacion's done a fantastic job of integrating himself, and that's fun to watch because we've seen in the past where you've seen the fraudulent guy come in, like Swisher, who supposedly, he went to Ohio State and there was all that buzz, but everything was with him seemed so charismatically forced. Encarnacion just seems sort of, a little different in that regard, which is nice. So I guess we have to talk about organizational depth. These guys are both in their 30s. So the injury risk is a little higher. So why not Jesus Aguilar, Jim? A better question, perhaps, for you to answer is, why is he still on the roster of 40 men?
So the easy answer to that is exactly what you just said. I mean, Jesus Aguilar is the guy we're talking about. They're really, the nice thing is we have Bradley in AA, but I don't think there's anybody in the organization who thinks that he isn't going to have 2 full years in the minors before he's up. So organizationally, Jesus Aguilar is our depth. I guess, he's a guy that people rip on year after year, but he's a lot like the catcher position in Columbus. He's a guy. He's a guy to fill that Columbus role, and why not him? They could go out and get anybody else, and they have. I mean, they have gone out and got. I forget who they got. They got some guy who played in the bigs last year, and this is a position I think that you can find a Jesus Aguilar anywhere. I guess why not Jesus Aguilar? It's not like I think. When you look at the financial constraints, and constraints anymore isn't really the right term to use with the Indians. I think when you look at the financials of the big league club, with the amount of money that they have in Edwin Encarnacion now, and of course Santana in his final year, I think you're looking in a position where the Indians, I mean, why they've tried to draft a player to fill the role. They finally succeeded, it seems like, in a guy like Bradley, but here's another guy who strikes out 35% of the time in the minors. I don't know. I mean, they haven't, this for some reason is a position that they haven't hit on. So at the end of the day, when you're talking about what they have to do to fill in the Columbus holes, I mean, you either make a big trade and you bring in a prospect, or you have Jesus Aguilar. So while Jesus Aguilar is a craw in the neck of many, I just look at him as a guy who just stays at Columbus and they bring up in September for no other reason than to bring him up. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, there's nobody in the Indians front office that thinks Jesus Aguilar is a future first baseman for the Indians. Or they wouldn't have paid $55 million plus incentives for Edwin Encarnacion.
Yeah, I mean, Aguilar's body looks like it was built with 7 pints of ice cream from Mitchell's every day for the past 2 years. But I mean, he's quaint in some ways, I suppose. But let's talk about Bradley for a minute, because I think this will be sort of an interesting conversation. He's going to be reaching AA this year. We've seen really absurd power production. We've seen slight reductions in his K percentage as he's climbed. He's only 21 years old. He's been incredibly young for his level while he's producing. Differs in the regard for the strikeout issues that Zimmer has had as someone who's average age generally for his level. Is this guy a long-term? Give me the odds he's a long-term starter at first base in Cleveland. Or in the big leagues. Give me the odds he's a long-term starter in the big leagues.
Well, I mean, I think even with a top prospect, the number 1 prospect first baseman, I think you'd say, I mean, when you're looking at a prospect, I mean, with anybody who's not Mike Trout, I mean, what would you be at, like 25%? That would be like a really good predictor of long-term durability in the big leagues when you're in the minors, especially taking into account the amount of players in the minors. So, I mean, I think that when you're looking at a guy who's sitting, right around the 30% mark with K percentage, while he does bring about a vast amount of power and there's a lot to like as a youngster, I think, he's entering AA, he's entering AAA, where you enter really good pitchers. I mean, you're looking at the best pitching prospects from every organization, and especially when you're playing in the Carolina League, when you strike out a lot, this is a make it or break it year. So I think the real story for Bradley will be this year with a full season at Lynchburg. Can he handle these stud pitchers that he's going to see multiple times in an 8-team league? So I don't know. I mean, I guess right now I'd say long term, it's hard for me to say. I think this is a guy the Indians are investing a lot of time in. I think it's somebody who, as we gain access to minor league, coaches this year, Mike, I think it's somebody who we want to talk about because, they're going to say high things about Bradley, but I think we both know the things that they say about true prospects. When you hear them talk about a guy like Greg Allen, you hear them talk about a guy like, in the past, a guy like Clint Frazier, you're looking at, these sure things where you could hear the contact piece, you can hear the defensive stuff where you hear they believe this guy's a major leaguer. I don't know where Bradley stands in that regard because we haven't had the access. I think we will have a little bit of that this year. So I don't know, Mike. I mean, offensively, he looks to have some upside. I don't know a thing about him defensively to say anything more than, can he be a productive first baseman defensively? I don't know. So, until he plays a significant amount of time in the upper levels of the minors, I don't think that he's someone we can count on right now other than as a trade piece. For me, he's someone you use in July to bring back something that you need. And I know that's going to fire a lot of people up, but this is, I mean, you and I have covered the minor leagues probably as long as anybody who's talking Indians. So, I mean, that's what I look at him now. So long-term, first base seems to fold quite nicely with, Encarnacion's contract. But at the end of the day, I mean, 20% chance, 15% chance. I mean, and this isn't a knock on him. It's just the realities of the minor leagues. What about you, Mike? I mean, I think we both agree on a guy like Bradley based on that K rate. I mean, there's some other indicators that maybe tilt the other way. But I mean, as far as corner production, he is a little different than guys we've seen in the past. Is this maybe something, maybe a bigger flaw in the system that the Indians maybe, I mean, they just haven't been able to produce corner outfielders, corner infielders in the past?
Yeah, I think it's a significant issue. Bradley is really interesting. He has that really high walk rate. But one of my concerns with him, and it's, one of the Zimmer concerns, is these are two dudes who just pull the ball a ton. And when you have high strikeout rates and you're pulling the baseball a lot, you do have more power pulling the baseball, but also you lower your batting average on balls in play because you're going to get shifted like crazy, which is just a really big knock on your ability to be productive. It's really going to lower your ceiling. Now, I will say if he can continue to rock, and, these really high walk rates, the positive view has him somewhere north of Russell Branyan and somewhere just south of Adam Dunn, or a little bit south of Adam Dunn. I think that's sort of like the type of player Bradley looks like, unless he undergoes radical swing changes. But, I agree. The risk is so high when you have somebody rocking with 30% plus K rate, no matter the fact that he's a little bit young for his level. It's just really hard for those types of dudes to figure it out. Indians have had trouble developing these types of guys, swing and miss wise. I think we look at, and I wrote about this, and Dave Wallace talked about it a little bit, and didn't necessarily agree with me, but Indians have done a fantastic job taking guys like Brantley, Kipnis, Lindor, Ramirez, and adding power to guys with really good contact skills. But they haven't done a fantastic job getting guys who have a lot of power but have a lot of swing and miss issues, sort of refining them enough to produce at the big league level. I think that's sort of been an organizational competency issue.
Well, let's steer back to the big league scenario here, and with regards to Edwin Encarnacion and Carlos Santana. I do have some other directions I want to go with this, but let me ask you this. I think you mentioned Carlos Santana in his contract year. Edwin Encarnacion's, I mean, people look at him as a power hitter, but obviously you've mentioned the fact that he's much more than that. He's a fairly complete hitter. He's a guy who walks a ton, doesn't strike out as much as a normal power hitter would. My interest here is, the Indians have this interesting, first of all, I want to talk about batting order, but I also want to talk about, the MVP type seasons. I've been a believer in the past that if Carlos Santana could ever kind of cobble something together a little better, maybe gets a little bit lucky and maybe some of his numbers take a jump, which is what happened last year. But I think Santana's days of potentially being an MVP are over. But I think what's most interesting here is the Indians have put together two guys at first base and DH who could cobble together in the right scenario an MVP-like season. I mean, we're talking about a plus scenario where defense really doesn't matter because the offense is going to be so good. Can you see a scenario, Mike, where we don't get a boatload of production from the DH first base, the scenario that we have in place right now, of course, taking health into account?
Yeah, literally that's like the only way, right? If somebody gets hurt, these guys are both have above average contact and walk rate skills for power hitters. You know, they have all the power that you have, but without the strikeouts of Mark Trumbo, Mark Reynolds, those sorts of things. And that's why they're superior players by a large margin. And that's why they fit really well in the middle of the order. Those guys, you know, sort of provide this boom or bust production, which sort of injures the stability of contact, which injures your ability to sort of continue rallies and, you know, optimize run scoring. So these guys are going to be fantastic next to each other. I think Santana at the top for Encarnacion could be really fun. And I know, you know, there's different profiles of leadoff hitters. We can talk about that later. But, you know, Santana just gets on base. And then, you know, so Kipnis and Lindor do as well. But, you know, having somebody constantly on base for Edwin Encarnacion is a thing that's going to happen a ton. And, you know, that can make an MVP candidate case pretty easily.
Well, it seems to me that, you know, 2 years ago you had Kipnis predominantly the leadoff guy, whereas last year you had the Santana, I think, was 89 or 90 games, and then Rajai Davis, and with some other smatterings of other guys throughout the year. Davis is gone. Does that mean that the Indians are going to put Santana in that leadoff role, or, you know, are they going to be looking for somebody else? I mean, is this a scenario where they bring somebody else in this year, like a Rajai Davis? I mean, obviously it's not going to be him with him signing with the A's, but could there be a guy out there like perhaps a Rasmus that they bring in, or perhaps they make a trade yet with perhaps a team like Toronto to bring in a guy like Pilar, or maybe, you know, there's somebody else out there? I mean, is this a scenario where they are still looking for a leadoff hitter, or is this Santana's job to lose? And remember, as a switch hitter, this is a guy who could do it against both sides of the plate. They just didn't, because apparently Rajai Davis, even when he was playing really badly in September, is the guy you want to have in there as a leadoff hitter. Sorry, that was snarky, and I take that back. Not really.
Yeah, no. Yeah, it was tight. But, yeah, Carlos Santana needs to be the leadoff hitter. He's not slow enough with his OBP skills to really be a detriment on the base paths. I think one of the arguments is, you know, when you're leading off or something, someone who's terribly unathletic, it can become problematic in terms of, you know, sort of leveraging the hits when they're on base. But I mean, that's not going to be an issue with Santana. He's fantastic in that role. You know, he's the best on the team at getting on base. Having power in that role is actually pretty useful too. You're getting more at bats for a guy who has power, but also doesn't strike out much. And I think that's the best way it fits. I don't think there's a guy out there that they can acquire with Enciarte off the market. I love Kevin Pilar, but I think he's someone who probably hits later in your lineup, towards the bottom end. I don't know if there's a dude I think Davis was the best option of guy if you really believe in the speed leadoff guy to go with. But if you give up on the speed leadoff guy, then I think Santana's a phenomenal placement. He hit really well in that role last year. He handled it really well. He adapted to it. So, you know, I think it's a really good fit.
Well, and then there's one other piece to this puzzle that's kind of curious to me, and there's been a lot of reasoning on why the Indians brought in Encarnacion, and I mean, I think, you know, obviously for guys like us, you know, he was a guy that we targeted pretty early in our offseason talks, but, you know, is there a bigger picture to this? I think that, you know, bringing in a guy like Encarnacion is obvious. It's a fit where he's replacing a guy, you know, and Mike Napoli, who gave us production early in the year, and then his swing and miss really started to hurt us really after June. So obviously Encarnacion improves us there, but the Indians spent an inordinate amount of money, and while it's a bargain for his services, in reality, it is against the grain for the Indians to bring it. I mean, this is in one way the biggest free agent signing the Indians have ever made. I mean, and fiscally, I'm talking about the fiscal piece to this, but I'm also talking about kind of the splash. I mean, they went out and they got perhaps the best hitter, if not the best free agent hitter out there, the second best, depending on what you believe in with regards to a guy like Cespedes. But, you know, they went out and they made this splash. Let me ask you something, Mike. There's been a lot of talk about Michael Brantley, and I'm bringing him into the equation because I think the obvious place to put Brantley, if he's not healthy, is first base or DH. And I think the Indians just swallowed that up. So there is no at-bats really at first base or DH other than a sporadic here and there. So here's my question, Mike, and this is where, you start to wonder about Brantley and his health. The Indians took away his backup. I mean, if he's not healthy to play left field, did they bring in Encarnacion to take the place of Mike Napoli? Or did they bring in Edwin Encarnacion to take over for Napoli and perhaps some of the perceived Michael Brantley production?
Yeah, I think it's the second. Yeah, I think he has to take over some of Brantley's production. Brantley to me is someone, we've talked about this. They're literally not literally. I have zero expectation in production from Brantley. Whatever he gives you is gravy. The Indians did this long term. They can decline Brantley's options for the next 2 years after this if he's broken, which is very, very, very possible. So I think, in terms of financial commitments, so you're going to have Brantley and probably Santana coming off the books. You have to replace a lot of their offensive production to keep that window open, and Encarnacion does that.
And does that in a big way. I mean, I think this is a guy who looks like, even over the length of this contract, that he's going to be a bargain and a half. What'll be interesting is when we get to the potential fourth year to see if he's still producing, to see if the Indians take him up. All right, as we wrap things up, Mike, I guess you should wrap this up. I'm sorry, I'm not taking this from you. You go for it.
This is where I provide the conclusion. That's exactly like my opening paragraph. Is this what you're telling me?
I mean, if you want, like if you can stall, I can write it down on a piece of paper and I can hold it up to the screen.
So here's the deal. There's a lot of content up at WFNY that's worth reading right now. Pieces over the past month. He wrote really in a detailed manner about Jason Kipnis, which is a fun read. You should read that. We're going to be sort of changing our column model at WFNY, at least for a lot of the Indians coverage. You'll be seeing that change over the next month, and you can react and tell us what's good and what's bad. And we'll sort of try and listen. I probably won't. And finally, that's all we have for this week. We'll be previewing second base next week. Thanks for being on, Jim. Talk to you soon.
Peace. Michael Martinez, second base. Don't kill me now.